Hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here this evening, especially with Louise, who I met several years before COVID. And we delivered a session together in London. And it's just great to be with you, Louise, this evening, and a very important topic. So I'm going to be moving the slides along. And my first slide, I'm actually going to take you back to when I first started as a student midwife. I think this might have been a little bit before then, but I couldn't find an exact photograph. But this kind of does highlight how things have changed. Here you have women in bed, regimented, holding their babies, and the midwives looking very strictly on with a nice, neat table in the middle. And if you kind of think about postnatal care, for midwives, certainly today in the hospital setting, you can see that there's a vast difference. And when we're thinking about the health and optimizing health for mothers during this postnatal period, when I think back to my early days, and certainly I've still got a book, and I've been referring to my book, which I'm going to show you here. I'm going to get it up and show you here. Actually, it's a bit tricky. When Maggie Miles from many years ago, and I've been reading it and actually quite alarmed by some of the directives that were given to mothers. But really, on the positive side, though, there was a lot of focus on rest and nutrition. And even though it was kind of white middle class nutrition, there was still, really kind of trying to ensure that women had a really good start with their babies. One of the bad things was we separated mothers and babies in those days, but then that's another topic in itself. But certainly in relation to the health of the mother, the rest was a really big focus. So yeah, really different and interesting for me to kind of look at that as to what's happening today. I don't think there's any connection between a postnatal ward today and what we're looking at here. So the fourth trimester is absolutely one of the critical points within the the childbearing journey. It's a really, really important part that's very often overlooked. And I think as health professionals, we very often focus on ensuring the mother or the person gets the information about the birth. And that's usually directed by them. Women are usually really keen to know about the birth plan. But of course, it goes much further than the birth in terms of coping and adapting with a new, at least one new baby. And so we have to keep reminding ourselves that this part is probably the most intense part of the journey. And, in order for them to start their life as a parents and to give the foundation for health and well-being in the future, it's important that we share information and point people in the right direction, really, if we can't give that information or if we can't provide certain aspects of the support. But it's just, there's so many things, so many resources out there that we can direct women to if we can't be the ones who deliver the information. So women are very often feeling pressured after the birth of the baby. And, when I was working as a community midwife, I remember when I was going into homes and listening to them, feeling overwhelmed and feeling like it was especially first-time mums, all of a sudden because there was someone else to look after, they very often forgot to look after themselves. But on top of that, complaining of things such as excessive tiredness, difficulty, maybe sometimes challenges with feeding their babies, babies waking, and they weren't quite expecting that, waking a lot, and problems sometimes with passing urine, excessive blood loss. Sometimes it's bowel function, that they've got constipation, or they feel worried about going to the toilet because of perineal trauma. And these things they very often talk to the midwife about in those first few days. And these are, sometimes unexpected. And the reason why I'm kind of laboring on this is because I think because we have got very little time in the postnatal period to kind of focus on all these things. It's important that we pass information on during pregnancy or at any connection that we have with women during that journey. But midwives are feeling pressured, enormously pressured. And we heard from Jenny earlier about the fact that midwives are being pulled in from community. And I know for many, many years, my colleagues, midwifery colleagues who are working in clinical practice are telling me that actually the home visits that we used to deliver many, many years ago have actually been cut right back. And women and people are being invited to go into clinics, into children's centres or into GP surgeries to receive that support. So that's hard for the people who are receiving the care, and it's also difficult for midwives too, because very often they know that actually a home visit would be much better in order to assess how the baby's feeding, how the mum is coping, how she's sleeping, whether she's feeling anxious, and really just to assess the whole situation. But of course, that's not happening at the moment. So that's why it's important that we have to, at every contact, share as much information as we can. And I'm just going to come on to some of that information in a moment. So when we're sharing knowledge and sharing evidence-based information, we have to be considerate of the fact that every single person that we come into contact with has got their own backstory, their own social underpinnings and their own cultural backgrounds. So everyone's an individual, and we have to be mindful of those things in every connection that we have. So when it comes to food, for example, and we're talking about nutrition, I remember as a clinical midwife having a photograph at parent craft sessions that was of a meat and 2 veg and some potatoes, and it was all nicely cut out in circles and divided up. But of course, that's not the case now, because we know that we are working with very many different cultures, women from different backgrounds, different countries. And so just being mindful of the fact that this is the case. And there are resources available, and this is one excellent resource that's free to access. And just to give you an example of the fact that we can, if we're talking about healthy food, healthy diets, that we can direct people to this resource. It's freely available, and it's around tasty recipes that are culturally aware, culturally sensitive for women with and birthing people with gestational diabetes. So I think that's excellent. I've had a look at it, and it's really brilliant. We have to be aware of the social backgrounds of people that we're serving. So not just the which area they're from, but also things like same-sex parents. It could be, and also that people might not be able to afford to have the kind of food or the kind of suggestions that we're making for healthy lifestyles. So it's got to be really sensitive to every single person that we're working with, just making sure that the information is tailored to them. So, for example, we have resources such as the Baby Buddy app, which is freely available to everybody in the United Kingdom and in some other countries as well. I think it might be Ireland. And this app is fabulous in that it's, like I said, it's freely available. It's tailored to parents who want to access many, many different kinds of information. It's culturally sensitive. It's interactive, so you can actually create your own avatar. Women can create their own avatar, and fathers can do it as well, and midwives and health visitors. So if you're a birth worker, you can actually look at this app and see what kind of information is being shared, and the people can interact with you as well. And there's also, so if there's families who are on budgets, strict budgets, and certainly most people will be, given the financial climate we're in at the moment, there's books like Jack Monroe's book, Cooking on a Bootstrap. And I think, again, maybe not being able to afford to buy books, but using your library, your local library, to access these kind of resources. And there are many others too, which we can direct individuals to. So I'm just going to pass over to Mary now to talk about the recovery and healing. Thank you, Mary.
Thanks so much, Sheena. That was really interesting, and actually looking back at that photo as well, and kind of looking at the history of midwifery and things that we did do in the past, I think is really important, because ultimately that is how we learn, how we evolve, and how we adapt. So yeah, going back specifically to talking about healing and recovery in the postnatal period, because it's such an important time, and as Jenny highlighted at the beginning of this discussion, the fact that it's often referred to as the Cinderella of care. So I think that it is very tough times for midwives. We are, juggling a lot. And it's very difficult, as has been highlighted, and with the reduction of visits. So I think that it is important that we are mindful of that, and we do as much as we can to really empower women to support their own healing and recovery process, and equip them with the right information and knowledge to do so. So the question that I pose is modern day life preventing healing and recovery for women as well? And I think this is a really interesting concept, because there's a running theme around the globe. This isn't just in one country or one particular area, but around the globe, there's a real focus on the first 40 days following birth and the healing that's required for that time. And it's really respected and taken so seriously. And the common themes are keeping mums warm, ensuring that she's got good support, ensuring that she has enough rest and recovery, making sure that she's eating really good nutritious foods as well. And there's a lot of consideration for that. And I wonder if, in our modern day world and in our Western world, if we've kind of lost touch with some of that a bit. And we're living very much in an information age, in a digital age, and we're all, potentially guilty of this, certainly me included, of being on my phone a lot and feeling the need to really respond to people instantly. And I think the normalization of this fast pace of life can potentially impact the healing and recovery after birth. So the reason that I want to stress this as well is just so that, part of what I do a lot on even Instagram and online and the blogs and things that I write is just reminding mums that actually you are really in a healing and recovery process after birth. And it's really important to slow down. You don't have to reply to people instantly. And, even if you've got a backup of messages and emails for that period of your life, so be it. Because otherwise you may end up becoming depleted. And actually it's again being normalized, this real fatigue and exhaustion that mums are facing after birth. And I don't think that really should become a norm. I think that we should be supporting women and by just simply informing them of this really basic stuff and this kind of global and ancient kind of wisdom that has been passed down through many generations. So on the back of that note as well is encouraging mums not to just forget about themselves. And as mentioned, help them to tackle that fatigue. And one way that they can support their recovery and tackling that fatigue is understanding the importance of iron and anemia during pregnancy and therefore the postpartum period. Now, there isn't a substitute for a well-balanced diet. Most of us know that. But if mum does struggle to get enough iron in her diet, then supplementation may be a good option. Of course, we know that it contributes to reduction of tiredness and fatigue, already mentioned, and plays an important role in normal energy metabolism and oxygen transport and cognitive function. So the prevalence of anemia is huge, which we will go on to mention in just a moment. So let's move on to talk about the postpartum requirements of iron, which I don't think are often really discussed or perhaps even considered. So in comparison to pregnancy, maternal iron requirements do usually decline in the postpartum period, but they still are increased in the postpartum period compared to any time outside of pregnancy. So this time may be to restore an iron loss during pregnancy. It may be a good time to restore that during pregnancy, and especially if mums have pregnancies close together and they don't get on top of their anemia during pregnancy or in the postpartum period, they will continue on that anemia in subsequent pregnancies. So one of the strongest predictors of anemia in the postpartum time is anemia during pregnancy. And I think, as mentioned, that we're very good at surveillancing pregnancy. We're very good at antenatal care. There's a really big focus on that, and including for mums as well. They are really focused on their babies during pregnancy, taking the supplements, doing all of the right things during pregnancy because they're conscious that they're carrying a baby. But during the postnatal period, that can sometimes be forgotten. And sometimes they, won't take any supplements at all and will completely disregard the fact that they are bleeding. Maybe they're not eating the nutritious food that they were eating during pregnancy. So it's important to remind them of that as well. So the prevalence of iron deficiency anemia, shockingly, it affects 2.1 billion people, which is obviously absolutely huge. But in relation to us as midwives, doctors, birth workers, anemia is reported in around about 1 in 4 pregnancies. And one UK study found that that when postpartum HB levels were checked, that 1 in 3 women were actually anemic. So one of the concerns that I have surrounding this is we no longer check HB levels postnatally unless there's a clinical indication. So my concern is that there are mothers that are slipping through the net, so to speak, because we may classify their blood loss as normal. So say, for example, you might have a lady who's been, had low iron levels, or perhaps her iron levels have decreased throughout pregnancy, but they've remained quote unquote normal. Then she's had a baby, she's lost an EBL of 350 mils, say, and the accuracy of EBLs is another conversation. But let's go with that. So she's lost 350 mils. Maybe she's a vegetarian, but she doesn't hit the threshold for FBC or checking her iron levels. And therefore, she may then be at risk of becoming anemic. And the NHS Blood and Transport, in 2019 found the prevalence of iron deficiency anemia in pregnancy to be as high as 30%. But shockingly, it was as high as 41% in the postnatal period. I think that's another really important note to consider, is the fact that a lot of these mothers may well be becoming anemic during the postpartum period through continuation of blood loss. And as I mentioned, if you've got a lady who has maybe had a normal blood loss of 350 mils, for example, but actually she is 5 foot, she weighs 8 stone, but because it's 350 mils, it doesn't meet the threshold for PPH. So therefore, we might not consider the impact that is having on her physiologically. The other really interesting thing to consider actually is the impact of iron deficiency on the mother and the mental health impacts of this. So there's more and more research now coming out to suggest how important iron is when it comes to mental wellness and mental health. So iron deficiency is associated with low levels of serotonin. So I actually didn't know that until fairly recently, because iron is required to produce the behavioral neurotransmitter dopamine. So if you're lacking that, then you may clinically manifest symptoms of depression and fatigue. Now, I don't want to mask it, because the symptoms obviously of depression and fatigue are very, very important to address appropriately. And of course, there are various different factors that come into play with mothers that have mental health problems postnatally. And unfortunately, we are seeing a steady incline in that. So obviously, it's important to address it with the seriousness that it deserves, but treating or preventing anemia may well help to prevent postnatal depression. So yes, can iron supplementation help? And it's more than likely that it can help with all of the things discussed, with fatigue, with supporting good mental health. And as mentioned before, it can be an important consideration to remind mums to perhaps continue to take their pregnancy supplements if they are bleeding. And as I say, if they have got maybe other risk factors of not being able to get enough nutrition via their diet. So the research noted that a lot of iron supplementation is poorly absorbed, and sometimes that can be the way in which it is being taken. And also, I'm sure we're all very familiar with this. 8 out of 10 people report GI side effects, some of the most common ones being constipation and nausea, heartburn. And that leads to 50% lapsed users, which is obviously huge. So this is a problem that really does need to be addressed, because if you've got somebody who's taking iron, they're not getting on with it, and then they're not taking it, the impacts that will then have can be really quite significant. So iron supplementation may well be important for certain people, as we've discussed, that have certain risk factors, and also that consideration for mums to give them the information that they really need on how to optimize their health overall, and looking at everything from their unique situation, their cultural background, their diet, their blood loss, and just using your clinical judgment to have a look and say, well, actually, maybe this person would benefit from continuing to take pregnancy supplements or commencing active iron. And so you're more than welcome to try the benefits for yourself for free. You just need to scan this QR code here. Active iron is actually something that I take personally. I keep saying I'm postpartum. I'm not postpartum. I've got a 2-year-old, but I still feel postpartum because she breastfed as well for about 19 months. So anyway, I'm also vegetarian myself, and I do take active iron for those reasons. And I did take it after I had my baby as well. And I'm had a really positive experience with it, didn't have any side effects associated with it. And one study actually revealed that there was 6 times less gut irritation with active iron specifically. So, you know, if you fit that criteria, then yeah, feel free to request a pack yourself. Sheeena, I'll hand back over to you for your for the final slides.
Okay, thank you so much. That was really informative. I've learned so much from listening to you, actually, Mary Louise. And so just to finish off, just a reminder to midwives and any health visitors, student midwives, or anybody involved in maternity care, that actually, you know, whilst we're constrained and whilst there isn't the same amount of time that we can give to families like we have in the past, making every single contact count, which I've said earlier, and doing that with compassion and remembering that everyone is an individual and that circumstances are different for all of us. So, and I think that the key message is, you know, compassion for health and making sure that we look after each other as well as looking after the people that we're serving, so that we can optimize the well-being for the future of each family. So thank you very much for listening.